I'm pleased to be sitting here today with General Brian Peddle, International Leader of the Salvation Army. General, it's nice to have you here. Welcome back to your home territory of Canada, Bermuda. And it's wonderful that you're here with us today. How does it feel to be back on home soil with us?
Home is a place where when you go there, they got to let you in. Coming home is always great. I think it's the familiar. It's faces that you know. It's places that you are accustomed to. It prompted me to think a little bit with all of the movement of people in the world, the people who don't have the privilege of home. I come home to Canada and I'm embraced, welcomed. I'm feeling very comfortable. And yet I know there are millions of people in the world who have no identity of that nature. So it's reminded me of how valuable it is to have a place that you call home. Canada is my home.
Very good. Our territory was thrilled when you were elected General of the Salvation Army. You're our international leader, but you're also Canadian. And what has your Canadian identity done for your leadership style? How has that shaped you, being a Canadian?
Well, Canadians are distinct in the world. We're our own people. I think I would have to trace back my influence to my formational years in Newfoundland, where leadership in a community, leadership in a church, leadership in a family was important and significant. I saw many examples of that. It wasn't so much that they were famous people, but they were people who led with structure that made things happen. In my Army connection, I think I've been greatly influenced by the opportunity to lead in a variety of settings across Canada. I think I would give some tribute to the executive leader training that was available to me with the background of Simon Fraser University. I confess that I still use these frameworks of fair process, of understanding my current reality and leading with a consultative desire to create a really good outcome. So all of that still plays out, and yet I'm still learning how to be a good leader and enjoying the influence of many people around me.
It's the Canadian Staff's Band 50th anniversary this year, and there's lots of celebrations happening. How has the band's influence and music in general been felt in your life and in the lives of those around this territory, around the world, as the CSB has traveled to many different locations?
As a former territorial commander, I was told that the Canadian Staff Band was mine.
Right.
And I think that's because the band serves the territorial leadership so very well. In our time here in Canada, the band stood with us on a number of occasions, enhancing anniversaries, territorial events, and just fronting up with that sense of commitment and service. I was never a band member. I came to the Army just a bit too late. Strangely, the instrumentation, no pun intended, of banding here in Canada and around the world is just an incredible asset. And God has given banding and music to the Salvation Army uniquely. Canadian Staff Band continues to make a valuable contribution because in the band are people who know what it means to be committed, know what it means to serve, and out of their giftedness, they add something very special to the DNA of the Salvation Army in this territory. So God bless the Canadian Staff Band on 50 years of faithful service.
Indeed, it's quite a milestone.
Yeah.
Now that you've been in your position as general for 9 months, are there any surprises? Or probably many surprises, but can you tell us one or two that you didn't anticipate when you first became general?
Well, I've been an officer for over 40 years now, and I think what surprised me in this role is the privilege that's mine to see the Army in some of these 131 countries. So I show up in Kuwait, and Salvationists might ask, well, what's the Army doing in Kuwait? And I go to a safe house that the Salvation Army runs in Kuwait, and I see 22 young women that the Salvation Army has literally rescued, and I know what the Salvation Army is doing there. I go to places like Pakistan, and with all that's happening in the media while we're recording today about Pakistan and relations with India, we have 50,000 Salvationists in Pakistan who, in an environment where it's not easy to be a follower of Christ, they're faithful and they're serving and they're helping. And across the border in the neighbor India, 370,000 Salvationists. That's 1/4 of the Salvation Army in India. And these are not places where, again, the atmosphere is friendly to it. So I'm surprised at the incredible resilience of the Army around the world, where you and I have relative ease in practicing our faith, in being a Salvationist. But the world that I'm seeing is not always so easy. And I shouldn't be surprised. I should know it in my head and in my heart, but I am. I'm not taking it for granted that people are faithful.
It's an amazing window on the world you have as you travel.
Yeah.
Now, you said you're the 21st general and you want to be a general for the 21st century. It's a great quote.
Yes.
Can you explain what you mean by that? What's a general for the 21st century look like?
First of all, I'm not sure I started that quote, but it's been hung on my coat rack, if you like. I respect the past. I have always said that I have more of a forward view than a rear view. I build upon what people have laid down as foundational for the Army. And when I say I can stand upon the shoulders of those who've gone before me, that's about foundation, but it's also about being able to see further. And what I understand in that quote and the deep meaning in that quote is that we have to be innovative, we have to be relevant, we have to figure out how we interpret rock-solid truths in a language and in a context that people can rely on them today, as I did in my beginning days as a teenager or a young adult or whatever that might be. It's having an expectation that the message, the core service component of the Army, the mission of the Army, that finds itself forward in a generation that we are leading now and generations to come. I've always loved I think it was Commissioner Bill Luttrell when he was our territorial leader who used the tagline, "Forging a path to the future." We're not going back. We can't do everything the way we did it. So how do we embrace a new reality and to continue to be cutting edge, because God's hand of blessing upon us is about our faithfulness to the generations that we are serving now.
We've got new core values in the Canada-Bermuda territory, and those are foundational for how we do what we do. But the expression of that changes from place to place, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. At the beginning of 2019, as part of your New Year address, you issued a global call to mission. Can you describe the nature of that call to all Salvationists and let us know how can we play our part in that call to mission?
I'm assuming you want me to do that in 2 minutes or less. I just, because the depth and breadth of that call is quite significant. The call was released formally in January. The call had been settling in my heart since I drove away from the election day of the High Council. Very conscious of the fact that the Army would need to hear from me, and from that perspective, the Army needed to hear from God. I would need to put some words around what that message from the Lord would be for the time in which I have to lead the International Salvation Army. So I found myself in Deuteronomy chapter 10. What does the Lord require of you? The question was asked of Israel. And of course, the question weighed heavily upon me personally, because we've had generals that have churned out some beautiful trilogies of phrases that have lasted and stand through the times that we're living. And what I was feeling is that God had a call upon the Salvation Army, and I had enough evidence in my view to say that that call needs to be current, needs to be refreshed, and needs to be placed upon the Army. And that call is about being ready. We must be positioned ready to do what God is asking us. It is about our prayer lives. It's about living a holy life. It's about those things. It's about being battle ready now. The war is raging now. People need to be introduced to faith now. And so it was about being ready. It was about being engaged. We can't be in this world and somehow hide behind anything that takes the interest away from the core mission of the Army, and that is to win the world for Jesus. However we unpack that and make it work where we are. And then I didn't finish up with another B word. It was Salvation Army, take responsibility. God has called us, God has commissioned us, He's created us with a certain DNA. We have a bias for the poor. We're interested in those who have no voice. We don't want to see the marginalized further marginalized. And so Salvation Army, stand up and take responsibility for the mission that God has given to us. That goes alongside of everything that every territory is doing, every territorial strategy, the values that you have here in Canada and Bermuda. And this is not meant to replace anything. This is meant to put a blanket of calling over the Salvation Army, because that's what God is saying to me as its leader.
Now, in other interviews that I've read, General, you've alluded to reviewing the Soldier's Covenant. How do we keep soldiership relevant and engaging? Are there changes that may be coming to the Soldier's Covenant? What's the nature of those changes, if so?
I'd have to begin by saying that perhaps it's not so much the Soldier's Covenant that needs addressing. The Articles of War, as we call them, and the I will statements that really craft out values, if you like, a way of living out your Christian commitment as a Salvationist. I think these are quite rock solid. The initiative that International Headquarters is starting, and it's already well down the track, by the way, is the rewriting of the soldiers' orders and regulations as we know them. Okay. So what we have happening is these being rewritten, but they're linked to and unpacking the various I will statements. So what does it mean for us to value this or value that? And how do we come towards that in the context of how we live? I've put forward, and I think it's getting some really good traction wherever I travel in the world, that soldiership is not a rite of passage. It's not even about membership in the Salvation Army. Soldiership can be reconfigured and recrafted and presented to our people as a call to serve, a call to identify with a lifestyle. You're not going to be forced to do it, and you won't be any less a person by not doing it. But I would wager that if you feel God is calling you to soldiership, and if you understand the principles that are engaged with that soldiership, you'll be a better soldier if you're responding to a call that comes from the heart of God to you. Hopefully, it'll be a way of re-engaging with soldiership around the world.
That fits well with what we're doing here in Canada and Bermuda, because we have a campaign calling the courageous.
Yes.
And we've featured a number of testimonies in Salvationist magazine and elsewhere of folks who have felt this deep conviction to be a soldier and all that means. And so we continue to uphold that choice.
Excellent.
One of the challenging things that we're facing in terms of leadership, officer leadership, in our territory alone, we have over 50 officers who are retiring this year, and then about 13 who are on a track to be commissioned and ordained.
Right.
Are we facing a crisis of leadership? What are the solutions that we need to consider?
As territorial commander in Canada, we knew this year was coming because we could project the retirements, and so the numbers are valid and are concerning, and we should acknowledge that. The territory then has a responsibility to be quite vigilant as it looks at those realities. Sitting as the General of the International Salvation Army, I have other perspectives that I bring to this reality in Canada. And the reality in Canada is replicated in, at least 6 or 7 or 8 more substantial territories around the world like Canada. So it's not something you share alone. There are other territories who are facing this. What's absolutely astounding from my perspective is that we have more officers, active, commissioned, ordained officers in this moment than we've ever had in the last 30 years. 17,465 active officers, not retired, but active officers. We are commissioning year on year, at this point in time, more new lieutenants than we've been commissioning in the last 20 years. So that would suggest to you that we have an international resource, but we have some territories that are not keeping up with the needs of their certain locations. So one has to start asking how, as stewards of that contingency of officers, how do we deploy those both in their homelands and internationally to meet the needs of leadership around the world? It's a curiosity.
Yeah. Traditionally, we've often sent officers overseas.
Right.
Overseas personnel.
Yes.
Can you foresee a day when we'll bring officers from overseas here more frequently?
I hope so. That has to be one of the synergies that gets to take place. Canada has been I just thank the territorial commander for sharing Canadians with the world. Yes. But how do we mobilize people to also come and share in ministry responsibility in Canada? Some territories are beginning to unpack this and doing well with it. We have places in the world where we can't train officers because we can't place them, right? So candidates are being held back. We have other places where we're only training one session because it's not that there aren't appointments, we can't sustain them in the field. So there are a variety of things happening, and when Canada puts its hand up and says, we might not have enough officers in the next years, well, maybe the International Army can help with that. We have to work it through.
That leads to my next question in terms of how do we address this inequity between territories, especially the financial disparity between the Western and the developing world,
Yes.
because it's there.
Yeah.
Are there strategies for equalizing or helping overcome that great need?
Yeah, there are strategies. I want to remind whoever's going to be hearing my words, the world you describe is the world that we live in. That disparity is there and not just a Salvation Army issue. The Salvation Army is trying to create a reasonable equity within a context that is not marked by equity, right? So how do you, for instance, sustain a young officer couple with 2 children in a community and in a country where the standard of living is miles from what we're accustomed to in this land? There are strategies. We are very active as we speak, working on strategies. We know we have to, and we have got every territory and expression of the Army world in a conversation around towards self-support. Because in some respects, we've created a dilemma of dependency around the world, whereas that isn't the greatest evil. The greatest evil is that we don't find ourselves moved towards more self-dependency. Hey, William Booth said he didn't want to start a religion that was going to be too expensive for the people.
Right.
In some ways, we've done that, and I could give examples. So I think it's about understanding. It's about understanding that in certain contexts you can't lift people higher and out of the disparity that's reflected throughout a country. You have to figure out how to be the best and the most equitable army where we are. And so we have an incredible international helping hand, if you like, a helping mechanism. Canada does it profusely. We help around the world. We build schools. We we fix buildings, we support people, and I think we have to keep doing that kind of thing, but careful with the margins of the country and what is appropriate. An author in the States a few years ago wrote a book that says, giving until it hurts. Finding the right thing, working in partnership with a receiving land has to be the priority. But good things are happening.
Right. And can you name one or two where you've been very encouraged in your travels, where you've seen that spirit of the Army at work?
Yeah. I think I've got to say to you, we have 22 countries where we serve that are on the 50 top countries watch list where it's hard to be a Christian. 22. We have 2 in the top 10. That means that I'm not welcome. Getting a visa to get in there is not easy. It doesn't matter what rank I have. So I come away sometimes absolutely inspired by the fact the Army's growing in those oppressed environments. And not only growing, but taking a real big share of membership in the Salvation Army. I think that really overwhelms me someday, and it says something very significant about the faithfulness of God, even when the circumstances seem quite daunting. I'd say that to you today.
On a related subject, we talk about inequity, and we talk about gender, and recently you shared in the Officer magazine a provocative article called "Have We Got It Wrong?" And you noted that we haven't always lived up to our reputation on gender equality. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Could if we had a lot of time. Basically, I think we've not done as well as the general public would pat us on the back for. I've been interviewed, and the question has started with the Army has given a really good place to women through the years, and I accept the pat on the back, and yet behind that I know the accolade needs to be qualified because I seem to be working in a very male-dominated Army where some, but only a few, female commissioned and ordained officers have positions of influence when it comes to leadership and policy and these kinds of things. So we have to change. Never mind changing culture. We have to shift culture. 60% of these 17,000 officers are ladies, and we are missing out on their leadership, their contribution, and therefore, personally, I believe the Army is somewhat poor because of that, because there is gifting and abilities there that we haven't maximized. So 153 years later, I think we're trying to draw a line in the sand and say, what can we do to mitigate against that? What courageous steps do we take? And out of IHQ, there is a task force at the moment, which I hope will engage the Army world. I wrote the article for the Officer magazine. But it's quickly clear to me that the issue isn't just the officers. Salvationists have to grapple with this as well, of being accepting regardless of gender as far as the leadership piece is concerned. And we have to chat amongst ourselves about that. So I hope it becomes a dialogue that we'll all engage in, and perhaps in another decade we'd be a little further down the track than we are at the moment.
One of our values is service, and one of the important caveats on that is service without discrimination.
Yes.
And I think that applies to our social service expression in terms of how we reach out to people.
I'd want to add to that. I'd want to add, let's not hide behind our service as a function. I think we need to include in that we do that with the love of God, the same love that we received. We share that back out so that our service in meeting the need of shelter or food or companionship or whatever, that goes along with a genuine value of the person that we're serving. And it just gets us into another deeper relationship possibility with others around us.
Right.
Yeah.
When we speak about relationships, that's one of the things that's very important to the next generation.
Yes.
and if we could call them Gen Z,
Yes.
those people born after 1995, sadly in our society, an increasing number are identifying as non-religious.
Yes.
How are we positioning ourselves, or how should we be positioning ourselves to effectively reach that generation?
That generation needs to be acknowledged. Understanding why they're voting with their feet needs to be understood. And we can't protect the Salvation Army's future by relying on the longevity of those that are there now. So there's no future in living longer, okay, for the Army.
Yeah.
So here's a large, significant number, and your numbers are probably reflective of Canada. My numbers internationally would even creep a little bit higher, and it is concerning. I think the church, and I include the Salvation Army in this broad term, church, the body of Christ, we have to repent and say sorry for betraying trust, for creating a time in our history where we've not been faithful as God's church here on earth. A lot of the departure from the church is based on the fact I just don't trust that stuff anymore. So I'd go back and say that body of people still need to hear the truth, but they need to see integrity, they need to see authenticity, they need to see service that includes both the lack of discrimination, but the addition of love. They need to see a Salvation Army particularly that's fully engaged in the things that matter in the world, and that is sometimes the social justice agenda. Strangely for me, as I go around the world, I see contingents of young people and young adults who are still passionately committed to the Salvation Army, passionately engaged in the Salvation Army. So on one front, the statistics of the millennials, or whoever we call them, scares me, bothers me, gives me a pain in my heart. But on another front, it doesn't steal my optimism, because these same people are looking for something worthwhile, looking for a cause, looking to belong, and maybe it's an opportunity for the Salvation Army to front up and say, we can help you with that. I hope.
It's encouraging indeed. And I wonder if there's any final words you'd like to share with Salvationists at the close of this interview. Is there any message you'd like to send to folks in the Canada-Bermuda territory or around the world?
Yeah. I think I'm back to the call. If we have a Salvation Army that's ready to serve, ready to put it on the line, as it were, to engage with neighbors and friends and communities where you live and where you have acquaintances and influence, to engage in a way in which you don't leave your faith at home. Faith is a factor in living. And you don't walk away saying, well, it's not my responsibility. Look, friend, you may be the only person that has a Christian faith that they will ever meet today or this week. So taking responsibility to have a sense that costly compassion is not something that you just put back in the drawer when you go somewhere. You take it with you. It's not a Sunday thing. Enabling our people, calling our people to be fruit bearers in the world day by day. I think that's what I'd be asked. I want to lead a Salvation Army that's invigorated, that believes in its mission, that still understands that each of us redeemed for a reason and committed to the cause of Christ. And outside of that, everything else is window dressing.
Well, thank you, General, for your commitment and for your passion for the mission. We continue to pray for you and for Commissioner Rosalie as you travel around the world. And we wish you God's best, and we wish you God's blessing.
Thank you so much.